This opinion is bound to be divisive, but I believe Ami Kawashima is the greatest thing to ever happen to Toradora. Mind you that I know she isn't exactly the most beloved character in the series, and I also don't find that she's my personal favorite either. However, putting subjectivity aside, I can say that her impact on the show is absolutely massive and frankly isn't talked about nearly enough. Today my goal for this video is to list off all the reasons that our dumb chihuahua is the greatest character in Toradora. Feel free to disagree, but at least hear me out first. Her introduction and how she offers a unique perspective to others. Most of our initial impressions of Ami were negative considering how stuck and rude she was when meeting Taiga for the first time. And of course prior to that, Takasu was slightly smitten with her outward facade of being an airhead. However, her outward rudeness is something I find really interesting compared to the other characters. She has an honest personality and isn't afraid to say exactly what she thinks about who she's thinking it about. Mind you that she's being overly rude to a fault, but nonetheless this is being 100% honest when putting her thoughts out there. This brutal honesty separates her from everybody else immediately. And I find this relatable because ultimately if you ask me something, I'm going to be completely honest when giving my response. With me sharing somewhat of her ideology, this gives me some insight into how her brain works. She wants something, she's going to show it and of course do everything in her power to get it. An example with Takasu. She makes her intentions fully clear in this scene.
好きになる?
Kawashima.
Mind you, this clip was only a short while after she'd known the guy, but she evaluated him and decided that she wanted to date him. Whether or not this is your OTP isn't relevant, but my point here is that she isn't afraid to let how she feels do the talking. She still maintains that fake outer shell, but with people like Takasu, she's not afraid to speak out and act, which is another thing that divides her. Every other character in the show is terrified of acting on their feelings because they feel it will ruin something. Taiga thinks that if she tells Kitamura that he'll hate her, Takasu doesn't want to say anything because he thinks Minori will view him as a creep, and Minori won't tell Takasu because she thinks Taiga needs him. My point is that Ami doesn't have that. The hesitation is never present. Like sure, she's not completely fearless, she has fears like the Stalker, but literally anyone would be scared of that. Speaking of, that experience reinforced her ideology and if anything made her even less hesitant to act on her thoughts and feelings. Especially when you consider how quickly she acted on those feelings in the clip we watched earlier. She's also got a leg up on the rest of our cast maturity-wise when you consider her background with modeling and how she's essentially a mostly grown adult compared to even Kitamura. I think she's really mature as she never really whined or complained to get what she wanted. Ami always found realistic means to pursue and attain her ambitions. And when she didn't get what she wanted, she never found it wrong and went on with her life anyway. Like, sure, she was bummed about Takasu's choices, but she did everything on her end by expressing herself in an organic and real way. So yeah, she's a breath of fresh air compared to the other characters, but how exactly does that make her better, you might ask? She improves the other characters and the show. It is an undeniable fact that Ami has caused our characters to confront themselves in the show, be it intentionally or not. Her presence single-handedly forced Taiga to learn how to swim in an effort to stop her from taking Ryuji back to her beach house. Which, by the way, was the same episode I fell in love with Toradora that I also made a full video on if you want to check that in the description down below after this video is done. However, that instance is just one of many examples. Another I can give is how she practically called Minori out for coddling Taiga in an attempt to make her happy. And of course, she did the exact same thing to Takasu, noting that their relationship was unnatural and the three were essentially playing house with Minori and Ryuji as the parents and Taiga filling the role of the child. And these situations came to boiling points both where Taiga had her outburst in the episode I mentioned before, as well as when Minori and Ami had their massive fight on the ski trip after arguing in the girls' room. Like, her and Minori had a proper go at each other verbally in the lodge, which of course Minori kept brushing off until eventually out on the slopes, Ami didn't give her the chance to run away from it anymore. Both of these incidents caused a massive shift in the narrative. By pushing people, they're more prone to act. Ami knew this and of course was fed up with everyone playing games. As such, she took matters into her own hands and baited them into action rather than letting them sit idly by as life went on. Like, I can't even express how important this is to the plot of Toradora. Would Taiga have ever realized she may have had feelings for Ryuji had she not been forced into this by Ami? Would Minori have ever found the resolve to ensure that she would find her own happiness regardless of what anybody else thought? Much like Ami, I'm gonna be honest here and say absolutely not. How could they? Her actions, while really strong-handed, force these characters to confront things they would not have otherwise without the interference. Which guides me into my next point. She leaves the show better than when she came in. This will likely be a point of contention as well for some people, but I firmly believe she left the show better than when she arrived. Think about it like this, you have 4 safe people living safe lives. They're always thinking about taking chances, but quickly get dissuaded because ultimately it could lead to their safety being threatened. Nobody's going to act, and most people will stick with the safe option rather than even thinking about taking a chance. That's the exact situation our characters are in at the start of the show. Mind you, I think hesitation is an important thing. It grounds us and keeps us from going off the rails every moment of every day. However, life is something we all only get to experience once. You don't get to take a second back of it ever. So Ami's ideology, while bold, is completely reasonable. And by the point that she's pushing everybody, she's become a round character who is ready to embrace the idea of fearlessness as she chased that camera-wielding creep in episode 6. However, she transforms further and becomes a confidant of sorts for the cast while also maintaining her own interests. As we said before, she presses people to act, applying her ideology to their lives and coming up with a really accurate set of conclusions about their interests. Mind you, it didn't take a rocket scientist to tell that Kushieda was into Takasu, but you get my point. I think she sees a lot of her younger self in Minori, which is another reason I see her as more mature than the rest. Their relationship is a lot like an older sibling trying to guide a younger sibling. Mind you that she isn't exactly close with Kushieda, but she's ultimately trying to help push her beyond that comfort zone, which is of course much like what a big sister would do for her little sister in a situation like this. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't exactly her place to do this, but if it wasn't Ami, I genuinely don't think Kushieda would have confronted her feelings. In fact, I can't think of a single other person in the series who could have pushed Kushieda to the points we saw. Ami broke down that outer mask and revealed the insecure and emotionally troubled person that Minori is, which by the way made her much more relatable. Like, I love her peppy self, but it's unrealistic to have a character who can only express that. By adding this layer of depth, it made her feel more complete and allowed us as viewers to get a better look at the whole of her person. In fact, Minori is probably my favorite character in the show for her resolve and spirit. However, I doubt that would be the case if Ami didn't push her as hard as she did. Speaking of things I doubt would be the case, let's talk about the ending, shall we? Regardless of if you agree with the end pairing of Takasu and Taiga or not, one thing is certain, and it's that Ami played the most pivotal role in them discovering and acting on their feelings. We can first talk about how she essentially cleared the way for their relationship by making Minori evaluate her feelings, and while we've been over this plenty by now, it ultimately led Minori to finding that she was never going to let anyone else dictate what made her happy. In isolation, this was a great moment, but what it meant essentially was that she did of course like Ryuji. Unfortunately though, it just wasn't what was going to make her happy. She wanted to pursue softball and keep chasing down her dreams more than she wanted a relationship. And by her addressing this outright, Takasu no longer had reservations about the feelings that had been festering for quite a while. Taiga and Ryuji had been together for a good while by this point, and the writing on the wall was clear. They had feelings for one another, and Taiga had completely given up on Kitamura by this point. The only thing that was left was him letting go of his crush on Minori. One thing I want to point out once again is that Ami never pushed Minori to give up. She pushed her to confront her inner feelings, and what she came to was ultimately a byproduct of her own thoughts. However, she also prodded Takasu to figure out what his and Taiga's relationship is, which again she saw as them playing house with how he treated her. She used adjectives like unnatural to describe it because ultimately she needed to express just how abnormal their tandem was. It wasn't two friends looking out for one another, it was something deeper, something more potent. Dressing up in that dumb bear costume, making her food, caring for her, are all things you don't do for someone if you're just friends. Like, yeah, I care for my friends, but I'm not going to dress up in a bear costume on Christmas Day and walk to their house and almost die falling out my window. It's not going to happen. So, naturally, she and the rest of the cast forced Taiga and Takasu to confront in the classroom on that fateful evening, where of course the palm-top tiger took off and Ryuji only had the choice to chase her down. Ami was the catalyst who put all these interactions in motion and made them confront these things, even pushing Takasu one last time when asking him if he loved Taiga. This was for herself as a form of closure, but was also a way to make him fully confront it outright. It's a really unsung moment, because ultimately this was right before we had our big blow-off where we saw our tiger and dragon tandem take off. And mind you, Ami kept composed and wasn't bothered by it. She was ready to move on right there and then, and she did exactly that. That's about all I have to say to argue my point about Ami being the greatest thing that could have happened to Toradora. She was a necessary evil to some, but I think much like the description for episode 6, she was neither angel nor devil. She was simply a girl who had her passions and wasn't afraid to act on them. And as such, she pushed everyone around her to be better and confront their insecurities and feelings with everything they had. Whether or not you agree with her methods, it's undeniable that the show was propelled forward by her character and the actions that she took. I'm totally rambling now, but this was the Ami video I had promised at the end of my last Toradora video, which you can check out in the description down below where I talk about the potential return of the series and assess possible plot lines that could follow. I could go on for days about why I love Ami and how important she is, but I promise you I've hit all my main points in this video. However, if you have anything additional to add, I encourage you to leave it in the comments down below, as I'm super active down there and love having conversations about this series. And like I said earlier, I don't feel like Ami's talked about enough. However, while you're scrolling down to leave a comment, I'd really appreciate it if you gave the video a like and maybe subscribe to the channel. I'll be posting more on Toradora going forward, as I have video ideas that I think you'd like to see, so stay tuned for those. But if you want more of that Toradora content now, I'll be linking a few videos in the description down below for you to check out as well. Anyways, my name is DylanJayFox. I hope you stay safe and be bold, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.